Let Grandma use the paper plates. She breaks everything. That's what my daughter-in-law said, loud enough for the whole kitchen to hear, while she was setting the Thanksgiving table with my dishes.
Welcome back. I'm Grace. Honestly, my heart breaks for this woman. Imagine being told you're too clumsy to eat off your own family heirlooms while you're shoved into a corner on a wooden stool. Today's story is about Carol, and she's about to show her family that she knows exactly what her life and her dishes are worth.
My grandmother's dishes. The ones I'd carried across 3 states and 40 years of marriage, wrapped in newspaper and prayer. I stood there by the counter, holding a paper plate with little cartoon turkeys dancing around the rim, the kind you buy in packs of 50 at the dollar store. Shelby handed it to me without looking at my face. Actually, that's not true. She did look. She looked at my hands first, then wiped the plate with one of those antibacterial wipes she keeps in every room, like I might have contaminated it somehow between the package and her fingertips. "Here you go, Mom," she said, with that smile she uses when her friends are watching. Sweet as pie on the outside, and underneath. Well, I've tasted warmer things in hospital cafeterias. I took the plate. I said thank you. I sat down on the little wooden stool she'd put in the corner of the kitchen. "So you're not in the way during the chaos, Mom." And I watched her carry my grandmother's gravy boat to the dining room table, like it was something she'd picked up at a garage sale. That gravy boat, if you want to know, sold at Sotheby's 3 years ago for $8,000. A nearly identical one, I mean. Same period, same pattern. Famille rose, Chinese export porcelain, 18th century. I know because I spent 31 years working with pieces just like it at the Belworth Regional Museum. And I know because I had the whole set appraised in 1994 for insurance purposes. $40,000 back then. More now. A lot more. But Shelby didn't know that. To her, it was just that old Chinese stuff that came with me when I moved in, one more box of clutter from her mother-in-law's past life. I watched her ladle cranberry sauce, the kind from a can with the ridges still visible, into a serving bowl worth more than her car payment. I didn't say a word. You want to know why I kept quiet? Sit down. Pour yourself something. This is going to take a while. To understand how I ended up eating Thanksgiving dinner off a paper plate in my own son's house, you need to go back. Not just a few months, not just a few years. You need to go back to a woman named Opal, who was my grandmother, and who spent 40 years of her life cleaning another woman's house in Boston. Opal started working for the Whitfield family in 1921. She was 17 years old, fresh off a train from Delaware, with one suitcase and an address written on a piece of brown paper. Mrs. Whitfield. Adelaide, though Opal never called her anything but ma'am until the very end, was a widow with no children, a big house on Beacon Hill, and a collection of things her late husband had brought back from his travels. Porcelain from China, silk from Japan, brass from India. That house was like a museum, Opal used to say, except she was the only one who kept it from gathering dust. She worked there for 40 years. 40 years of scrubbing floors and polishing silver and washing dishes so thin you could see light through them. 40 years of being invisible when guests came and indispensable when they left. Mrs. Whitfield never married again, never had children, and as she got older, she leaned on Opal more and more. By the end, my grandmother was less a maid and more a companion. They took tea together on Sunday afternoons, the two of them in the parlor, using the good china because Adelaide said, "What's the point of having beautiful things if you never touch them?" When Adelaide Whitfield died in 1961, she left the house to a distant nephew who sold it within the year. But in her will, there was a small paragraph about Opal. Just a few lines, written in that formal language lawyers use. She left my grandmother the Famille Rose tea set, 24 pieces, plus the gravy boat, because, the will said, she is the only person who ever loved them as much as I did. Opal carried that set home on the bus. She didn't have a car, didn't have much of anything, really. Just a rented room and a Social Security check and a set of dishes that would turn out to be worth more than everything else she'd ever owned combined. But she didn't know that then. She just knew they were beautiful, and they were hers, and she'd earned them with her hands. I inherited the set in 1978 when Opal passed. I was 30 years old, married to Eugene for 5 years already, and we were living in a little apartment that smelled like radiator heat and ambition. Gene thought I was crazy for wanting to keep them. "We could sell those, buy a real sofa," he said once, half joking. But I couldn't. Every time I looked at those dishes, I saw my grandmother's hands, red and cracked from decades of other people's housework, holding something precious, like it was made of light. The day we brought the dishes home, I remember unwrapping each piece on our bed. Our whole apartment was that small. The bed was the only surface big enough. Gene sat beside me, watching with that patient look he always got when I was doing something he didn't quite understand, but loved me enough to witness anyway. "Tell me again," he said, "about your grandmother." So I told him. About the house on Beacon Hill with its tall windows and dark wood floors. About the way Opal described Mrs. Whitfield. Stern but fair, lonely in a way that money couldn't fix. About the Sunday tea ceremonies, when the two women would sit in the parlor and drink from these very cups, pretending for an hour that they were equals. About Opal's funeral, where I was the only one who cried, because most of her friends had already died and the rest were too old to travel. Gene listened to all of it. Then he picked up the gravy boat, turned it over in his hands, and said, "Well, if we're keeping these, we better use them. No point having pretty things if they just sit in a box." That became our rule. Special occasions only, but we'd find reasons to make things special. Gene got a promotion? Good china. Keith took his first steps? Good china. We survived tax season without killing each other? Good china and a bottle of wine. I never sold a single piece. I used them for special occasions, Christmas, Easter, anniversaries. I learned about them, studied them, eventually built a career around that knowledge. For 31 years, I worked at the Belworth Regional Museum, starting as a part-time assistant and ending up as the head curator of decorative arts. I've held pieces in my hands that belonged to emperors. I've authenticated items worth more than houses. And the whole time, Opal's dishes sat in my china cabinet at home, waiting for Sunday dinners and birthday parties and all the ordinary moments that make a life. Gene used to joke about them. "Those dishes are going to outlive us both," he'd say, "and they'll be sitting on the table when our great-grandchildren fight over who gets the drumstick." He was right about the first part. He didn't live to see the second. Eugene died 4 years ago. Stroke. It happened at breakfast on a Tuesday, over scrambled eggs in the morning paper. One minute he was complaining about the prior night's ball game, and the next minute he was slumped in his chair, and I was on the phone with 911, trying to remember our address like I hadn't lived there for 36 years. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. The paramedic, a young woman with kind eyes, told me he probably didn't feel much. I don't know if that was true, or if it was just something they say. I nodded anyway. What else can you do? The first few nights were the worst. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning reaching for his side of the bed, and the coldness of the empty sheets would hit me all over again. I started sleeping on his side instead, wrapped in his pillow, breathing in whatever was left of him. The grief counselor said that was normal. She said a lot of things were normal that didn't feel normal at all. I couldn't eat eggs for almost a year. Couldn't even look at them in the grocery store without my throat closing up. To this day, I buy my breakfast from the bakery down the street. Muffins, toast, anything that doesn't require a frying pan and a memory I can't outrun. The house felt wrong after that. Too quiet. Too full of his things. His reading glasses on the nightstand, his cardigan on the hook by the door, his smell still in the closet even after I washed everything twice. For a year, I stayed. I told myself I was fine. I watered the plants, paid the bills, went to the grocery store every Thursday like I always had. I even kept setting 2 places at the table for a while, until one day I looked at the empty chair and thought, "This is foolish, Carla. The man is dead. He's not coming back for dinner." I put his plate away that night. It felt like burying him all over again. Then I fell. It was February, a little patch of black ice on the front steps, and I went down hard. Broke my wrist in 2 places, bruised my hip so bad I couldn't walk right for a month. The neighbors found me. I'd been lying there for 20 minutes, maybe more, too stubborn to yell for help until the cold made the decision for me. Keith drove up from Ashford the next day, his face all pinched with worry. Shelby stayed in the car with the kids for the first hour. "Because they'd just be underfoot," she said later, though I think she was checking her phone. "Mom, you can't stay here alone," Keith said, sitting at my kitchen table, looking around at all the things he'd grown up with like they were suddenly dangerous. "What if this happens again? What if it's worse?" "I've lived here for 36 years, I said. "I'm not leaving because of a little ice." But he kept at it. "He's always been like that, my son. Not loud, not pushy, just persistent in that quiet way that wears you down like water on a stone." Over the next few weeks, he called every other day. He sent me articles about elderly fall risks. He had Shelby email me listings for senior living communities with photographs of smiling gray-haired people playing cards by a fireplace. And then he mentioned the in-law suite. "It's just sitting there, Mom. We had it built when Shelby's father was sick, but well, you know. It's got its own bathroom, its own entrance. You'd have privacy. And we'd be right there if anything happened." I thought about it. I thought about the empty chair at my table, the ice on the steps, the 20 minutes of lying there with snow soaking through my coat. I thought about my grandson Caleb's voice on the phone, asking when I was coming to visit again. I said yes. Looking back, I can see all the places where I should have asked more questions. What exactly did joint management of my money mean? Why was Shelby so insistent that I sell the house instead of renting it out? Why did Keith need me to sign those papers so quickly, without time to read them properly? But you don't ask those questions about your own son. You trust. That's what mothers do. We trust even when we shouldn't, even when every instinct says slow down, read the fine print, make sure you know what you're agreeing to. We trust because the alternative, believing our children would take advantage of us, is too painful to consider. Jean would have asked the questions. Jean would have sat down with a calculator and a yellow legal pad and gone through everything line by line. But Jean was gone, and I was tired. And Keith kept saying, "It's easier this way, Mom," until I believed him. That was 3 years ago. Sometimes I wonder what my life would look like now if I'd said no. Here's what they don't tell you about moving in with your children. You stop being a person and start being a situation. At first, it wasn't so bad. Keith helped me sell the house. "You shouldn't be worrying about property taxes and repairs, Mom." And the money went into a joint account for easier management. I brought what I could fit. Clothes, photo albums, a few pieces of furniture that meant something. The dishes, of course. Some of Gene's things. His favorite cardigan, his watch, a box of letters we'd written each other when he was stationed overseas in '69. Shelby watched the movers carry in my boxes with a look I couldn't quite read. Later, I realized it was the same look you give a stain on the carpet, something you'll have to deal with eventually. "There's not a lot of storage space," she said, as the boxes piled up in the garage. "We might need to edit some of this down." "These are my things," I said. "Of course." She smiled. "I just meant, for your comfort. Less clutter, more peace of mind." I let it go. You let a lot of things go at first. The in-law suite was nice enough, small but clean. One room with a bed, a sitting area, a little kitchenette I never used because Shelby said it was more efficient if we all ate together. A bathroom with grab bars Keith had installed before I arrived. A window that looked out on the backyard where I could watch the kids play when they were home. For the first few months, I tried to be useful. I offered to cook dinners, to help with the kids' homework, to tend the garden like I'd done at my own house for decades. Shelby thanked me for each offer and then explained why it wasn't necessary. The kids had activities. The garden had a service. Dinner was complicated because of Caleb's allergies and Zoe's vegetarian phase, and Shelby's intermittent fasting schedule. "Just relax, Mom," she'd say. "You've earned it." But relax started to feel like stay out of the way, and earned it started to sound like you're too old to be useful. Little things piled up. The way Shelby would wipe down the counter after I touched it, like I'd left something behind. The way she'd answer questions I asked Keith, as if I wasn't capable of understanding his schedule. The way she started referring to me in the third person when I was standing right there. Does she have a doctor's appointment this week? Did she take her pills this morning? Is she going to need a ride? She reorganized the kitchen 3 months after I arrived, put labels on everything, the spice jars, the drawers, the shelves. When I opened the cabinet to find my coffee mug, I saw she'd made a section for it. The label said, "Guest Items." I'd been living there for a year. That was the moment I should have said something. I should have marched into the kitchen, pointed at that label, and asked Shelby what exactly she thought she was doing. But I didn't. I stood there looking at those 2 words, guest items, and I told myself it didn't mean anything. She was just organized. She liked labels. It wasn't personal. The lies we tell ourselves to keep the peace. I've got a whole collection of them by now. There were other things too. Small things that added up. The way she'd sigh when I came into the kitchen, like my presence was an interruption. The way she started referring to my room as the suite, not your room or even Mom's room, but the suite, like I was a guest at a hotel. The way she'd schedule family activities without telling me, and then act surprised when I asked why I hadn't been included. "Oh, we didn't think you'd want to come, Mom. It's a lot of walking. We figured you'd be tired, Mom. It was going to be a late night. We assumed you'd rather stay home, Mom. You know how you get overwhelmed in crowds." I don't get overwhelmed in crowds. I spent 31 years working in a museum full of tourists and school groups and screaming children on field trips. I can handle a trip to the mall, but Shelby had decided who I was. Fragile, confused, in the way, and nothing I did could change her mind. The kids started pulling away too. I noticed it first with Zoe, who used to come to my room after school to tell me about her day. Suddenly, she was too busy with homework or activities or whatever was on her phone. When I asked Keith about it, he shrugged. "She's 11, Mom. They get moody at that age." Maybe. Or maybe Shelby had started telling her things. Little things, like Grandma needs her rest, or Grandma doesn't like noise. Little things that added up to a wall between us, built one brick at a time, so slowly I didn't see it until it was already too high to climb. The first time I tried to use my grandmother's dishes was Christmas, about 2 years ago. I'd been thinking about it for weeks, imagining the table set the way it used to be when Jean was alive, the porcelain catching the light, the kids asking questions about where it came from. I wanted to give them something real, something with history. In a world of paper plates and plastic everything, I thought maybe they'd like to hold something that mattered. I mentioned it to Shelby a few days before. "I have a china set," I said. It was my grandmother's. I thought maybe for Christmas dinner we could use it. She was loading the dishwasher and didn't look up. "That's sweet, Mom, but I've already got a whole theme planned. Color coordinated, you know? Maybe next year." It's been in my family a long time. I thought the kids might like to hear the story." She turned then, holding a plate, and gave me that smile again. The one that doesn't reach her eyes. The thing is, those old dishes can be fragile. And with Caleb running around, it's just a lot of risk for one meal. You understand. I understood. I understood that she didn't want my old things on her new table. I understood that my grandmother's 40 years of service and my 40 years of keeping were worth less than a color scheme from Pinterest. "Of course," I said. "You're right." Next Christmas, same story. And the one after that. The dishes stayed in their boxes in the garage, between the lawn chairs and the holiday decorations, gathering dust. You know that old saying, "What you don't know won't hurt you"? Whoever said that never had a daughter-in-law. It was September, about 3 months before the Thanksgiving I started telling you about. I was looking for my passport. Foolish, really, since I hadn't traveled anywhere in years, but I'd gotten it into my head that maybe I could take a trip somewhere. See the ocean again. Smell salt air instead of Shelby's lavender diffusers. The garage was a mess. Boxes stacked on boxes, everything coated in a fine layer of dust that made my eyes water. I found my suitcase first, empty, buried under old camping equipment that no one had touched in a decade. Then I started looking through the boxes with my name on them. That's when I found it. A box near the back, newer than the others, with Shelby's handwriting on the side. "Donate. Mom's stuff." I should have walked away. I should have closed my eyes and pretended I hadn't seen it. But I've never been good at that, at not knowing. Jean used to say I'd argue with a fence post just to find out which side it was on. I opened the box. Inside were my cookbooks, the ones with handwritten notes in the margins, Jean's favorites circled, my mother's pie crust recipe tucked into the back of one on a yellowed index card. I pulled that card out and held it for a long time, reading my mother's handwriting. Cold butter, cold hands, cold heart. That's the secret to good pastry. She wrote that when I was 12 years old, teaching me to bake in her kitchen while the radio played in the background. 40 years later, I could still hear her voice saying those words. And Shelby had put it in a box marked "Donate." My Curator of the Year plaque from 2009 was in there too. I'd worked so hard for that award, 12-hour days, weekends, the entire restoration of the Bellworth collection after the flood. Jean had taken me out to dinner at the fanciest restaurant in town, and I'd worn my mother's pearl earrings, and he'd raised his glass and said, "To my brilliant wife, who spends her days surrounded by priceless things and still thinks I'm the treasure." I kept that plaque on my office wall until I retired, and then it came home with me. And somehow it ended up in a box in Shelby's garage, waiting to be given away to strangers. There was a photograph from our wedding, the one I thought I'd lost in the move. Jean in his borrowed suit, me in my mother's dress, both of us so young we looked like children playing dress-up. We'd been married 41 years when he died, 41 years of fights and makeups, of money troubles and small victories, of raising a son who turned into a man who married a woman who was throwing away our wedding photo. Jean's reading glasses were in there, the ones with the bent frame that he refused to replace because they still work, Carla. Don't be wasteful. I used to tease him about those glasses. Now I couldn't look at them without wanting to scream. And at the bottom, a catalog from Sotheby's. I almost missed it. Just a glossy magazine, nothing special. But there was a sticky note on the front and a page marked with a paperclip. The note said, in Shelby's handwriting, "Ask Kay about the old dishes?" The marked page was the Asian art section, Chinese export porcelain, Famille Rose. There was a photograph of a tea service almost identical to mine and a price estimate, $35,000 to $45,000. I sat down on an old lawn chair right there in the garage, and I stared at that catalog until my eyes burned. She knew, maybe not exactly, maybe not the full history, but she knew enough to look it up, enough to mark the page, enough to start wondering what those old Chinese things might be worth. And she'd put my wedding photograph in a box marked "Donate." At the bottom of the box, under everything else, I found Jean's cardigan, the dark blue one with the patches on the elbows, the one he wore every Sunday to read the paper, the one that still smelled like him even after all this time. I buried my face in it, and for the first time since he died, I cried, like something inside me had come loose. For a few days after that, I didn't do much. Stayed in my room. Told Shelby I had a cold. She left soup outside my door, canned, not homemade, and reminded me through the wall that she really couldn't afford to get sick right now. But here's the thing about being 73 years old. You don't have time to wallow. Every day counts different when you're not sure how many you have left, and I'd spent too many of them already pretending everything was fine. The next Monday, I told Shelby I had a doctor's appointment. I did not mention that the doctor was Bernard Hatch, an estate attorney who'd helped me sort things out after Jean died. His office was downtown, a bus ride and a short walk, and I made sure to leave before Shelby could offer me a ride that would come with questions. Bernard looked older than I remembered. But then again, so did I. His office smelled like old paper and coffee, and there was a chip in his desk that I didn't remember from before. We'd all gotten a little worn around the edges. "Mrs. Novak," he said, shaking my hand. "It's been a while. What can I do for you?" I told him everything. The move, the joint account, the boxes in the garage, the catalog with Shelby's note. I told him about the power of attorney Keith had asked me to sign just in case, about the way my own money seemed to have drifted out of my reach, about the feeling of being a guest in a life I'd paid for. He listened without interrupting, making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me over the top of his glasses. "Carla," he said, "did you read the joint account agreement before you signed it?" I hadn't. I'd trusted my son. "And the power of attorney. Do you have a copy?" I didn't. Keith had kept the original for safekeeping. Bernard sighed, but not in a way that made me feel stupid. More like a man who'd seen this story before and wished he hadn't. "The good news," he said, "is that you're not as stuck as you think. The power of attorney you signed is limited, not general. Keith can manage certain financial matters on your behalf, but he can't sell your property or make major decisions without your explicit consent. And your personal belongings, including those dishes you mentioned, are legally yours. Nobody can take them or sell them without your permission." And the money from the house? That's more complicated. Joint accounts mean joint ownership, technically. But if you can show that the funds originated from the sale of your property, you have a claim. It might require some paperwork. Possibly some uncomfortable conversations. I thought about Shelby's smile, about Keith's silence, about the cardigan in the donate box. I can handle uncomfortable, I said. Bernard smiled at that. Not a big smile, just a small one. The kind that says he's seen this kind of strength before and knows what it costs. One more thing, he said, leaning forward. You mentioned dishes. Family heirlooms. If they have significant value, you might want to get them appraised officially. For the record. They were appraised in 1994, $40,000. His eyebrows went up. That's substantial. And you've had them this whole time? In your son's house? In their garage, mostly, and now in their china cabinet. Without any formal documentation of ownership? I felt something cold in my stomach. They're mine. Everyone knows they're mine. I'm sure they do. But knowing and proving are different things in a courtroom. Do you have the original appraisal, photos, anything that ties them to you specifically? I thought about it. The appraisal document was in a fireproof box somewhere, or it used to be. I hadn't seen it since the move. I'll find it, I said. Do that. And Carla? He paused, choosing his words carefully. If these dishes are worth what you say, and if your daughter-in-law has already done enough research to find Sotheby's catalogs, you might want to secure them sooner rather than later. I left his office with a pit in my stomach and a list of things to do. Find the appraisal. Photograph every piece. Document the chain of ownership. Protect what's mine. It occurred to me, walking to the bus stop, that I'd spent my whole career doing exactly this for other people's treasures. Authenticating, documenting, preserving. And I'd never thought to do it for my own. I didn't do anything dramatic. That's not how I was raised. Opal used to say, you don't start a fire when you're still inside the house. So I moved slowly, carefully, like I was handling something fragile. First, I opened my own bank account. A small one, at a branch across town where no one knew me. I had some money saved that never went into the joint account. Birthday checks, a small inheritance from a cousin, the kind of amounts that slip through the cracks. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Then I called Ruth Ann McCready, an old colleague from the museum. She'd retired the same year I did, but she'd gone to work for one of the big auction houses as a consultant. I asked her if she'd be willing to look at some photographs, give me an unofficial estimate. For insurance purposes, I said, which was partly true. She called me back 2 days later. Carla, she said, where on earth did you get these pieces? My grandmother. Why? Because if these photographs are accurate, and I'm assuming they are, knowing you, you're sitting on something significant. The market for Chinese export porcelain has gone up considerably in the last decade. I'd estimate the set at $45,000 to $55,000, maybe more if the right buyers are in the room. I thanked her. I wrote down the numbers. And then I sat in my little room and looked out the window at the backyard, where Caleb was kicking a soccer ball against the fence, and I thought about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. Shelby noticed something was different. I don't know exactly what tipped her off. Maybe I was standing straighter. Maybe I stopped apologizing every time I walked into a room. But she started watching me the way you watch a pot you're not sure is going to boil. You're going out a lot lately, she said one morning, catching me at the front door. Doctor appointments, errands. You know you can always ask Keith for a ride. We worry about you taking the bus. I'm fine, I said. The bus is good exercise. Exercise. She laughed, but it didn't sound like a laugh. Mom, you're 73. You broke your wrist 2 years ago. I just think we should be careful about overestimating. Overestimating what? Your capabilities. That's all. We just want to make sure you're safe. Safe. That word again. In Shelby's mouth, it sounded like a cage with a nice paint job. I smiled and told her not to worry, but I saw the way her eyes followed me out the door, and I knew something was coming. It came a week before Thanksgiving. I'd made a mistake, left an envelope from the auction house on my dresser, and Shelby had come into my room to drop off some clean towels. The envelope was gone when I got back from my walk, and that evening, there was a family meeting in the kitchen. Keith sat at the table, looking at his hands. Shelby stood by the counter, arms crossed, the envelope in front of her like evidence in a trial. Mom, Keith started, we need to talk. I can see that. Shelby found something in your room, and we're concerned. Shelby jumped in before he could finish. You've been talking to lawyers, auction houses. You're making phone calls, going places you won't tell us about. What's going on? Are you in some kind of trouble? I looked at my son. He was 44 years old, and he still couldn't meet my eyes when his wife was in the room. No, I said, I'm not in trouble. Then explain this. Shelby held up the envelope. Why are you getting mail from Christie's? What are you trying to sell? That's my business. Your business is our business, Mom. You live in our house. We have a right to know. I live in your in-law suite, I said, and my voice was steady. I pay rent, even if you don't call it that. The money from my house sits in an account with my name on it, and my belongings are still mine. Shelby's face went tight. We're worried about you. You're acting strange, secretive. Maybe we should have someone evaluate you, just to make sure you want to have me declared incompetent. The words landed like stones. Even Keith looked up. That's not what she's saying, he mumbled. Isn't it? I looked at Shelby, really looked at her, the way I should have looked 3 years ago. You've been waiting for me to slip, haven't you? Get forgetful enough, confused enough, that you can start making decisions for me. Easier to manage the old lady when she can't manage herself. That's ridiculous. Is it? Then why is my wedding photograph in a box marked donate in your garage? Why are my husband's things packed up like garbage? Why do you have a Sotheby's catalog with my grandmother's dishes marked inside? Her face went pale, then red, then a color I don't have a word for. I was just organizing. You were pricing. Keith stood up. Mom, that's enough. You're being paranoid. I'm being awake, I said. There's a difference. Keith looked at Shelby. Shelby looked at Keith. In that look, I saw everything. The conversations they'd had about me when I wasn't in the room, the plans they'd made, the calculations they'd done. They weren't worried about my well-being. They were worried about losing control. Mom? Keith tried again, using his reasonable voice, the one he'd learned from Shelby. We're just trying to help. You've been under a lot of stress since Dad died. Sometimes people your age, well, they don't always see things clearly. I see things more clearly than I have in years. Then explain why you're sneaking around behind our backs. Because the front of your backs has a locked door on it. That stopped him. Shelby jumped in before he could recover. This is exactly what I mean, the hostility, the paranoia. This isn't like you, Mom. You used to be so cooperative. I used to be quiet. There's a difference. She threw her hands up. I can't talk to her when she's like this. Keith, Do something. Keith stood there, mouth opening and closing. The fish look again. I wondered when he'd lost the ability to form his own opinions, or if he'd ever really had it. We'll discuss this later, he finally said, when everyone's calmed down. I'm calm, I said. I'm calmer than I've been in 3 years. I walked out of the kitchen, past the dining room, past the photographs on the wall where my face appeared in only 2 of them, both from before I moved in. I went to my room and locked the door, and I sat on my bed and listened to them argue in the kitchen, voices rising and falling like waves against a shore. That was the night I started looking for apartments. Thanksgiving morning came cold and clear, the kind of November day that looks beautiful through a window and bites through your coat the second you step outside. I'd been awake since 5, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through the plan in my head. Shelby had invited her parents, her sister, a couple from Keith's office. A full house. A big production. She'd been cooking for 2 days, filling the refrigerator with dishes I wasn't allowed to touch, decorating the table with things she'd ordered online, treating the whole event like a performance she was determined to get right. I got dressed slowly, put on the blue sweater Gene had given me the last Christmas before he died, brushed my hair, put on a little lipstick, the shade I've worn for 40 years, the one my mother always said made me look like myself. Then I walked into the kitchen. The chaos was already underway, Shelby barking orders at Keith, her mother peeling potatoes, her sister arranging flowers I recognized as the expensive kind from the florist downtown. No one looked at me when I came in. I was used to that. What I wasn't used to was seeing my grandmother's dishes spread across the counter. The whole set, plates, bowls, serving dishes, the gravy boat. Shelby was arranging them on a tray, placing little sprigs of rosemary around the edges, like she was staging a photograph, which I realized she probably was. "What are you doing with those?" I asked. Shelby glanced up barely. "Setting the table? They're perfect for the aesthetic." "Those are my dishes." "They've been in the cabinet for months, Mom. I assumed you didn't mind." "The cabinet in their dining room," she meant, the one she'd moved them to after decluttering the garage last spring. I'd noticed they were gone, but hadn't said anything because I'd learned by then that saying things didn't change them. "I'd like to use them for dinner," I said carefully. "They're meant to be used." "That's exactly what I'm doing. I mean, I'd like to be the one to use them. They were my grandmother's. I've had them for 45 years. Shelby set down the plate she was holding. Her smile was still in place, but her eyes had gone flat. "Mom, I'm sure your grandmother was lovely, but let's be practical. These are delicate, old, and, let's be honest, your hands aren't as steady as they used to be." "My hands are fine." "You dropped a glass last month." "I tripped. There's a difference." She sighed. "The way you sigh at a child who won't stop asking for candy. Tell you what. Let's not risk it today, okay? Too many people. Too much chaos. Let Grandma use the paper plates." She said it loud enough for her mother to hear, for her sister to hear. "Let Grandma use the paper plates. She breaks everything." I heard her sister laugh, a short, nervous sound. I saw Keith in the doorway, looking at me with something that might have been guilt if he'd let it stay on his face long enough. And I saw Shelby take the gravy boat, $8,000, the crown jewel of the set, and fill it with canned cranberry sauce, the kind with the ridges still visible from the can. She handed me a paper plate, the one with the cartoon turkeys. "Here you go, Mom. Careful, the edges can be sharp." I took it. I said thank you. I sat on my stool in the corner. and I watched. The dinner lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of Shelby's mother complimenting the gorgeous china and asking where it came from. 3 hours of Shelby saying, "Oh, these old things, family heirloom." Keith's side, from back in the day. 3 hours of her sister taking photographs for Instagram, angling the plates just right to catch the light. I watched them handle my grandmother's dishes like they were party props, passing serving bowls without checking for cracks, setting down cups without coasters, stacking plates in ways that would have made Opal weep. "Careful with that one," I said once, when Shelby's brother-in-law grabbed a saucer with sauce-covered fingers. Everyone looked at me like I'd spoken out of turn. "It's fine, Mom," Shelby said, with that tone she uses when she's performing patience for an audience. "They're just dishes. They wash. Just dishes." 250 years of history, 40 years of my grandmother's labor, half a century of my family's celebrations, just dishes. I ate turkey and stuffing off a paper plate. The turkey was dry, overcooked the way Shelby always overcooked it because she was afraid of salmonella. The stuffing came from a box. Jean used to make stuffing from scratch. Sausage and sage and chestnuts, recipe from his Italian grandmother. But when I'd offered to make it this year, Shelby said there wasn't room in the kitchen for both of us. No one offered me seconds. No one asked me to tell stories about the dishes, about Opal, about Adelaide Whitfield and the house on Beacon Hill. I was a piece of furniture in the corner, occasionally acknowledged, mostly ignored. Halfway through the meal, Shelby's mother turned to me and asked, in that loud, slow voice people use with the elderly, "How are you enjoying living with the kids, Carla? It must be so nice to have family nearby." I could feel Shelby watching me, waiting to see what I'd say. "It's educational," I said. Shelby's mother blinked, uncertain what to do with that. Then she smiled and turned back to her mashed potatoes, and the moment passed. After dinner, the guests drifted into the living room for coffee and pie. I stayed in the kitchen, watching Keith load the dishwasher while Shelby supervised. "Leave the china," she said. "I'll hand wash those later. Don't want any accidents." "Shelby," I said. She turned, eyebrows raised, like she'd forgotten I was there. "I'd like my dishes back now." A pause. Then that laugh again. The one that isn't really a laugh. "What do you mean back? They're in the cabinet. Where they belong. They belong with me. They've always been mine. And I'm taking them when I leave." Another pause. Longer this time. Keith stopped loading the dishwasher. Even Shelby's sister, passing through the doorway, went still. "Leave?" Shelby's voice was careful, controlled. "Leave where?" "My new apartment. I signed the lease last week. I move out December 1st. The color drained out of her face so fast I thought she might sit down. Keith dropped the plate he was holding, one of the regular dishes, not the good china, and it clattered in the sink. "Mom, you can't be serious," he said. "I've never been more serious." Shelby recovered first. She always does. That's crazy," she said. "You can't afford—" "I can afford a lot more than you think. The money is in a joint account, yes, which means half of it is mine, and I've already spoken to a lawyer about getting it back." The word lawyer landed like a slap. Shelby's sister, who'd been lingering in the doorway pretending to check her phone, suddenly found somewhere else to be. Keith found his voice somewhere in his throat. "Mom? You can't just— We've been supporting you for 3 years." "Supporting me?" I laughed. And it was a real laugh, the kind that surprises you when it comes out. "I gave you the down payment for this house. I paid for your kids' summer camps. I loaned you $30,000 for that kitchen renovation you never paid back. Don't you dare tell me who's been supporting whom." "That was different," Shelby started. "Was it? Explain to me how." She couldn't. She tried. I could see her brain working, searching for an angle. But she couldn't find one that didn't make her look exactly like what she was. Shelby's hands were shaking now. I'd never seen that before. "This is ridiculous. You're confused. Maybe we really do need to have you evaluated?" I finished for her. "Go ahead. Call the doctor. Tell him I'm crazy. Tell him I don't know what I'm doing." I walked to the sink, where the gravy boat was sitting, still crusted with cranberry sauce. "But before you do, let me tell you something about these old dishes you've been playing house with." I picked up the gravy boat, rinsed it carefully, the way I've rinsed delicate porcelain for 50 years. The water ran pink with cranberry sauce, and I thought about all the times I'd held this exact piece. Washing it after holidays, dusting it on Sunday mornings, holding it up to the light to show Keith when he was small, and asked why Grandma Opal's dishes were different from the ones at other people's houses. This piece sold at Sotheby's 3 years ago for $8,000, a nearly identical one, same period, same pattern. The full set was appraised in 1994 for $40,000. Today, it's worth somewhere between $45,000 and $55,000, depending on the buyer. Shelby's mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the first time since I'd known her, she was completely, utterly speechless. Keith wasn't much better. 40. Mom, that's more than your car, more than your kitchen renovation, more than every loan you've asked me for since you got married, combined. I set the gravy boat down gently on the counter, positioning it just so, the way I'd positioned priceless pieces in display cases for 30 years. My grandmother worked 40 years to earn these dishes. Scrubbed floors, washed windows, polished silver in somebody else's house, so that someday her family would have something beautiful to call their own. I looked at Shelby. Really looked at her, the way you look at a puzzle that's finally come together. You've been serving canned cranberry sauce out of a museum piece, and you gave me a paper plate. The silence in that kitchen was thick enough to cut. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, the refrigerator humming, my own heartbeat steady in my chest. Keith was staring at the gravy boat like it might bite him. Shelby was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. Maybe she hadn't. Maybe none of them had. "I'm going to pack my things now," I said. "The dishes, the boxes you marked for donation, my late husband's belongings, everything that's mine. I'll send movers for the furniture." I walked past Keith, past Shelby, past her sister who was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. At the doorway, I stopped. "You should have let me use the paper plates," I said. "You might have gotten to keep pretending they were yours." The week between Thanksgiving and my move was the quietest that house had ever been. Shelby avoided me like I was contagious. She'd walk into a room, see me there, and suddenly remember something urgent she had to do in another part of the house. At meals, the few times we were all at the table together, she wouldn't look at me directly. Just glanced in my general direction occasionally, like you check on a pot you're not sure is going to boil over. Keith tried to talk to me twice, once to apologize, once to explain. But both times he ended up standing in my doorway, mouth opening and closing, unable to get the words out. The fish out of water look, Jean used to call it. I'd seen it on my son's face too many times. The first time, he made it as far as, "Mom, I know things have been complicated," before trailing off and staring at his shoes. "Yes," I said. "They have. I just want you to know. I mean, Shelby and I..." "Keith, you're 44 years old. When are you going to finish a sentence without looking over your shoulder first? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The second time was the night before the movers came. He knocked on my door around 9, after Shelby had gone to bed, and stood there with a beer in his hand like he needed something to hold. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. He sat on the edge of my bed, the bed I'd bought for myself, that had come from my old house, that still had the quilt my mother made in 1975. And he looked around the room like he was memorizing it. "I don't know how it got like this," he said finally. "Don't you? I mean, we just wanted to help. After the fall, after Dad died, we thought it would be easier for everyone." "Easier for whom?" He took a long drink of his beer. "I love you, Mom, I do. But you and Shelby, you were never going to be friends. And living together just made everything worse. Keith, your wife put my wedding photograph in a donate box." He flinched. "She was organizing." She didn't mean... She meant exactly what she did. She wanted to erase me, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but a quiet old woman in the back room who didn't ask questions. That's not fair, isn't it? Tell me one decision you've made in this house without checking with her first. He couldn't, because there wasn't one. "I'm not leaving because I hate your wife," I said. "I'm leaving because I forgot who I was, and I need to remember before it's too late." He finished his beer in silence. Then he stood up, kissed my forehead the way he used to when he was a teenager heading out for the night, and left without saying goodbye. I packed my boxes myself, slowly, carefully, the way you handle things that matter. The dishes first, wrapped in tissue paper, each piece photographed and documented. Then Jean's things, the cardigan, the watch, the letters, everything Shelby had tried to throw away. My books, my photo albums, the little wooden jewelry box my mother gave me when I turned 16. On November 30th, the movers came. 2 young men, polite and efficient, who called me ma'am and carried my boxes like they were worth something, because they were. Shelby watched from the living room window. I don't know what she was thinking. I don't much care. Keith walked me to the door. His eyes were red, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw my little boy again. The one who used to bring me dandelions and ask me to make the hurt go away. "Mom," he said, "I'm sorry. I know you are. I didn't mean for it to be like this. Shelby said it would be easier. I thought we were helping." I reached up and touched his face, the way I used to when he was small. "You're 44 years old, Keith. At some point, you have to stop letting other people do your thinking for you." He didn't have an answer for that. I didn't expect one. "The door's not closed," I said, "but you have to walk through it yourself," without her translating. I kissed his cheek, picked up my purse, and walked out to the moving truck. I didn't look back. My apartment is small. 1 bedroom, a little kitchen, a living room with a window that faces east so I get the morning light. It's not fancy. The carpet's older than some of my grandchildren, and the elevator makes a sound like it's thinking about quitting every time it reaches the 3rd floor. The neighbors are a mixed bag. A young couple who works nights, an elderly man who plays jazz too loud on Sunday mornings, a woman with 3 cats who always stops to chat in the hallway. It's not the house I shared with Jean for 36 years. It's not the life I thought I'd have at 73. But here's the thing I've learned about plans. They're just guesses you make when you're too young to know better. Life has its own ideas, and sometimes the best you can do is hold on and steer. But it's mine. I unpacked the dishes first. Set them up on a shelf I bought at the secondhand store, positioned just right, so the light catches the glaze every morning. I use them now. Not every day, but often. A teacup for my afternoon coffee, a small bowl for my evening ice cream, things Opal would have approved of. I sold 3 pieces through Ruth Ann's auction house, enough to pay 2 years' rent in advance and hire an accountant to help me sort out the joint account mess. Bernard Hatch says it'll take time, but I'll get most of it back. Not that it matters as much as I thought it would. Turns out you can survive on a lot less when you're not paying for someone else's kitchen renovation. Keith called twice in December. The first time, I let it go to voicemail. The second time, I picked up. "Mom, are you there?" "I'm here." A long pause. I could hear Shelby in the background, saying something sharp I couldn't quite make out. I wanted to check on you. See how you're settling in." "I'm settling in fine." "Good. That's good." Another pause. "The kids miss you. Caleb keeps asking when you're coming back." My throat tightened at that. The kids, my grandchildren, who I'd barely seen in 3 years because Shelby always had an excuse, always had a reason, always had something more important happening. "Tell him I miss him too," I said. "Tell him I'd love to see him sometime, if his mother allows it." Keith didn't respond to that. I heard Shelby's voice again, louder this time, and then the line went dead. January came cold and bright. I woke up on New Year's Day to a world covered in frost, every branch and blade of grass outlined in white like someone had traced them with a silver pen. I made myself tea in one of Opal's cups and sat by the window, watching the sun come up. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name in careful, child-sized handwriting. Inside was a drawing, a house with 2 doors. One door was labeled Home and had stick figures standing outside. 2 tall ones, 2 small ones. The other door was labeled Grandma's House and had a single figure, smaller than the others, with something in her hands. At the bottom, in purple crayon, "I love you, Grandma. Come visit soon. Zoe." I put the drawing on my refrigerator next to a photograph of Jean and one of Opal that I'd found tucked in the back of an old album. 3 generations, watching me eat breakfast every morning. Some days I think about calling Keith, about trying to rebuild something from the wreckage. Some days I think about Shelby's face when I told her what those dishes were worth, and I feel something that's not quite satisfaction, but isn't quite sadness either. Mostly, I think about Opal, 40 years in someone else's house, washing someone else's dishes, invisible until the very end. And then, finally, she was seen. Not for what she could do, but for who she was. And she got to keep something beautiful, something that mattered, something no one could take away. That's what I have now. This apartment, this life, these dishes that catch the morning light. And the knowledge that I waited too long to claim them, but not so long that it was too late. It's March now. The ice is melting, and there are crocuses pushing up through the soil in the little garden plot behind the building. I've been talking to the super about planting some tomatoes this summer, maybe some herbs. He says he doesn't see why not. Last week, I got an email from Zoe. Her first email, sent from a school account with her teacher CC'd. "Hi, Grandma," it said. "Mom doesn't know I'm writing this. Can you come to my birthday party? It's April 12th. Please say yes." I haven't answered yet. I'm not sure what to say, or what Shelby would do if I showed up, or whether Keith would even let me through the door. But I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about a lot of things. Yesterday, I had tea with a woman from down the hall, Dorothy, who moved in last month after her husband died. She's 78, sharp as a tack, and has a laugh that can wake up the whole floor. We met in the laundry room, both of us trying to figure out the same broken dryer, and discovered we had more in common than appliance problems. We sat in my living room, and I told her about the dishes, about Opal, about the paper plates at Thanksgiving. She listened without interrupting, asking questions at the right moments, nodding at the parts that needed nodding. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "You know what burns me up?" she finally said. "The paper plate. Everything else. The money, the plotting, the donate boxes. That's bad. But it's expected, I guess. People are greedy, but the paper plate? Giving you a paper plate in your own family's kitchen while she serves cranberry sauce in your grandmother's china? That's personal. That's a statement." It was, I agreed. I just didn't hear it until then. Sometimes it takes a while to translate cruelty into plain English. We both laughed at that. Dark laughter. The kind that comes from knowing too much about how people disappoint each other. "You know what I think?" she said, leaning forward. "I think we spend so much of our lives being useful to other people that we forget we're allowed to just be. Be ourselves. Take up space. Use the good china." I poured her more tea. From one of Opal's cups, of course. "My grandmother would have liked you," I said. She smiled. I would have liked her too. The thing about getting old, and I mean really old, the kind of old where your body starts having opinions about everything, is that you stop caring about things that used to seem important. Grudges feel heavier when you've got fewer years to carry them. Pride gets expensive when you're counting your days instead of your dollars. But there's one thing I've learned that I wish someone had told me sooner. You don't have to earn your place at the table. You don't have to be useful, or quiet, or small, or grateful. You don't have to eat off paper plates while someone else uses your grandmother's china. You can just sit down. Use the good dishes. Pour yourself a cup of tea. And let anyone who has a problem with that find somewhere else to eat. Spring is here now, full and loud and impossible to ignore. My tomato plants are in the ground. Roma variety, the kind Jean used to grow in our backyard. And Dorothy has started coming over every Tuesday for what she calls tea and trouble. We talk about our children, our husbands, our mistakes. We laugh at things that aren't really funny and cry at things that aren't really sad. It's the best social life I've had in years. Keith came by last month. Without Shelby, for the first time since I moved out. He stood in my doorway, holding a potted plant that was already starting to wilt, looking around at my small apartment like he wasn't sure where to put himself. "It's nice," he said finally. "Cozy." "It's home," I said. "Come in, sit down." We sat in my living room, and he told me things about the house being too expensive, about Shelby's business struggling, about the kids growing up so fast he felt like he was missing it. I listened. I didn't offer solutions or money or advice. I just listened. After an hour, he stood up to leave. At the door, he turned around. "Mom, I know I screwed up. With the money, with everything. I let Shelby make decisions I should have made myself, and I'm sorry. I'm really sorry." "I know you are. Can we... do you think we could?" He trailed off, uncertain, that fish look on his face again. "We can try," I said. "But trying means showing up. Not just when you need something. Not just when Shelby says it's okay. You show up because you want to. Because I'm your mother, and I matter." He nodded. Didn't argue, didn't make excuses. Just nodded. I'll try, he said. That's all I'm asking. Zoe's birthday party was last Saturday. I went. Shelby didn't say much. A tight hello, a tighter smile, and then she stayed on the other side of the yard all afternoon, watching me like I might steal the silverware. But the kids ran up to me the moment I walked in. Zoe threw her arms around my waist. Caleb showed me a frog he'd caught in the garden. For 2 hours, I was a grandmother again. Not a burden, not a problem, not a situation. Just a grandmother, eating cake and watching children play and feeling the sun on my face. When I left, Zoe hugged me again, longer this time. "Will you come back?" she whispered. "If you want me to." "I always want you to." I kissed the top of her head, the way I used to kiss Keith's when he was small and the world was simpler. "Then I always will." I'm sitting by my window now, writing this, watching the evening light turn everything gold. On the shelf behind me, Opal's dishes catch the last of the sun, glowing like they've been waiting for this moment all along. 40 years my grandmother worked. 40 years of invisible labor. Thankless days. Somebody else's house. And in the end, she got to keep something beautiful. Something that mattered. Something that said, I was here. I counted. I think about her every day. When I wash the dishes, when I drink my tea, when I look at that gravy boat and remember Shelby filling it with canned cranberry sauce like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. It was everything. It was 40 years of history, 3 generations of women, a whole lifetime of being seen and being overlooked, and finally being valued. I don't know how this story ends. Keith comes around more often now, sometimes with the kids, usually without Shelby. Dorothy and I have started talking about a road trip this summer. Nothing fancy, just a drive up the coast to see the ocean. I haven't seen the ocean in 15 years. I don't know if Shelby will ever apologize, or if Keith and I will ever get back what we lost, or if those kids will grow up understanding why their grandmother had to leave. I don't know a lot of things, but I know this. I'm not eating off paper plates anymore, not ever again. There's a woman somewhere reading this who knows exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe she's sitting in a corner of her daughter's kitchen right now, or her son's spare room, or some other space that belongs to someone else. Maybe she's being told she's forgetful, difficult, too much trouble. Maybe she's watching someone else use her things, take credit for her life, push her further and further into the margins. If that's you, if you're out there holding a paper plate, waiting for permission to sit at your own table, I want you to know something. You don't have to wait. You don't have to ask. You don't have to be small or quiet or grateful for scraps. You can stand up. You can walk out. You can take what's yours and find a place where you're not just tolerated but wanted. It's not too late. It's never too late. And if you've ever sat in that corner, watching someone else live your life while you ate off paper, tell me. Leave a word. Say something. Anything. I need to know I'm not the only one who's been there. I need to know this story matters to someone besides me, because it's not about the dishes. It never was. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone forget it.
Carol didn't just take her dishes. She took back her respect. She's not eating off paper plates anymore, and she's definitely not sitting in the corner. Thanks for hanging out. You guys are the best. You know, what really gets me is the antibacterial wipe moment. Using a wipe on a plate before giving it to your mother-in-law is just a calculated way to make her feel dirty or less than. It's cruel. I love that Carol realized she wasn't the one who was broken. Their attitude was. Personally, I hope she sells one plate and goes on a luxury vacation. Would you have left in the middle of dinner or waited for the right moment? Hit that like button if you're Team Carol. See you in the next one.